Washington's financial fog has tricked Americans into believing that Ukraine is draining their wallets. But what if that's not true? Hello, this is Joe Lindsley in Kharkiv, Ukraine, just about 30 miles from the Russian border.
The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places.
I'm talking to you from the Old Hymn, a new version of an old beloved pub named for Ernest Hemingway in this university city. The original Old Hemingway bar was bombed by the Russians in the early days of the full-scale invasion. But here in Kharkiv, people don't wait for peace in order to start rebuilding. They don't need a rebuilding conference in Berlin. They do it now. They create, they live, they fight, and they rebuild every single day here. And in a city like Kharkiv, where people face war every single day, you begin to see through the headlines and the propaganda.
It is awfully easy to be hard-boiled about everything in the daytime, but at night, it is another thing.
President Donald Trump says Ukraine should pay back what it got from the United States. Fair enough, but before we talk about payment, shouldn't we ask this question? What has Ukraine actually received from the United States? And that's what we're here to find out. All of this talk of billions of dollars in aid, 300 billion, 100 billion, 90 billion. President Zelensky said 200 billion was missing. What is this really about? How much aid has Ukraine actually received? From here in Kharkiv, where the wall between tyranny and freedom is close at hand, the details matter the most. So, from this city, let's take a look at the real accounting about Ukraine. This is the official U.S. government website for tracking Ukraine's spending. It's a bit of a mess. It was made in the unaccountable days before Doge came into being. And right away, you'll notice something. This website doesn't even tell you how much money has actually been spent. You have to do the math yourself, of course. But we see that Congress approved $182 billion in Ukraine-related aid. Now, only $86 billion of that has actually been dispersed. How much of that actually went to weapons for Ukraine? That's the key question. Well, Congress approved $33.2 billion for weapons for Ukraine, but 21.7 of that is still unspent. So we do the math and we see that that means only $11.5 billion of all these appropriations has been spent on weapons for Ukraine. That's only about $4 billion more than what the United States abandoned in Afghanistan. But here's the kicker. That $11.5 billion, it's not actual cash. It's the estimated value of old American weapons pulled from warehouses. Weapons that the American taxpayers paid for decades ago. So the $11.5 billion is just a valuation. And who set that value? The Joe Biden White House. So that $11.5 billion is less aid than an accounting trick. It's a made-up number. It could be zero. It does not take into account the cost of storing these weapons in the USA. And it also doesn't take into account how America benefits from the testing of these weapons in wartime. Next, let's look at this figure. $45 billion is labeled as DoD stock replenishment. What does that mean? It means buying new weapons for America, not for Ukraine. These are things the Pentagon likely planned to buy anyway, and no one has delved into this topic. Is normal Pentagon spending being shoved into the Ukraine spending packages? And if so, why should Ukraine pay that bill? What if the aid for Ukraine is actually upgrading American military gear, boosting drone innovation, strengthening defense and security around the world, and creating the best ally you could imagine, the most battle-experienced army in the free world? So, from here in Kharkiv, I asked this question: what is one of the smartest things that Elon's Doge unit could do? I think break down the numbers on Ukraine spending, show the world what's really happening. A careful scrutiny of Ukraine spending might just reveal a lot of uncomfortable truths about the Pentagon. Let's return to the city of Kharkiv. This city was nearly destroyed in May 2024. Why? Because Joe Biden refused to let the Ukrainians fire back at the Russian missile launch sites just across the border, about 30 miles away. Still, people were staying here. The city was holding on. And the White House finally relented to international pressure to let Ukrainians fire back in a very limited way. But very importantly, when Ukraine used these American HIMARS to attack Russian missile launch points, they were crossing one of Putin's strictest red lines. Finally, under huge international pressure, the Joe Biden White House relented and allowed Ukraine to return fire in a very limited manner. And guess what? It worked. June 2024 was one of the calmest months in Kharkiv since the war began. The missile attacks that had been many times daily in May basically stopped. And yet, that didn't make any headlines because the absence of a problem usually is not an exciting story. And so Washington quietly went back to restricting Ukraine from fighting back. For that one brief shining month, Kharkiv proved the point. When Ukraine is allowed to fire back, Ukraine can win. To close, let's jump west across Ukraine, the largest country fully in Europe, to that city of Lviv. There, far from the front lines, Ukrainians are celebrating Easter with the full richness of their traditions, many of which were illegal during the times of Moscow Sovietism. And a lot of these scenes in Lviv are not covered by the legacy media. So as I close my report today, let's take a look at Easter in Lviv. This is Joe Lindsley reporting from Kharkiv, Ukraine.
You can't get away from it by moving. That's the hell of it.